Manchester is a global city of music, football, and innovation, but its story began nearly 2,000 years ago. In 79 AD, the Roman Empire pushed into northern Britain. Engineers chose a strategic sandstone ridge overlooking two rivers to build a fort, Mamucium. It was a distant, cold frontier outpost housing auxiliary soldiers from across the empire, serving far from their homelands. Outside the walls, a small civilian community known as a vicus flourished, where traders and craftsmen gathered to serve the soldiers. For 3 centuries, Mamucium stood as a stable outpost, but by the 5th century, the Roman Empire began to struggle. In 410 AD, Roman authority withdrew from Britain. The fort was abandoned and Mamucium slowly slipped into history, leaving only the foundations of the city we know today. For centuries after the Romans left, the area that would become Manchester remained a quiet mystery. Its name evolved from the Roman Mamucium into the early English Mamucestre. By 1086, the Domesday Book recorded it as a small cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by wetlands and farmland. But growth was coming. In 1222, a local market charter transformed this quiet outpost into a bustling trading hub. Farmers brought wool and grain from across the region, and the town began to expand around its central market cross. The parish church grew in significance, eventually evolving into the grand perpendicular Gothic cathedral that stands today. The town's true future lay in wool. Families spun and wove cloth in their homes, turning Lancashire's resources into tradable wealth. Even as the Reformation swept across England in the 1500s, Manchester remained a stable and growing center of local industry. From these modest roots, the foundations were laid for a city that would one day change the world. Earlier, in 1421, the main church had been reorganized as a collegiate church. This meant it was managed by a college of priests rather than a traditional monastic order. This structure allowed the church to remain active and influential throughout the changes that swept England during the Reformation. Later in the 1600s, England was plunged into a violent political struggle known as the English Civil War. The conflict divided the country between supporters of Parliament and supporters of the king. In the growing conflict, Manchester's citizens made a pivotal choice. They sided firmly with Parliament. In 1642, Royalist forces attempted to seize the town, believing it to be an easy target. Instead, they encountered determined resistance from local defenders. The town's militia was made up mostly of ordinary residents with improvised weapons rather than trained soldiers. Yet they managed to defend their town successfully against the Royalist attack. The victory strengthened Manchester's reputation as a stronghold of parliamentary support and demonstrated the determination of its people. By around 1650, the town had grown to roughly 5,000 residents. Compared with major cities, it was still small, but it was clearly developing. Manchester now had a grammar school founded in 1515, increasing levels of textile trade, and a growing reputation. Manchester was building a growing reputation as a commercial center within the region. Even with this progress, however, Manchester was still not a particularly remarkable place. Its narrow streets were muddy. Its buildings were mostly wooden and its economy modest. Few could have predicted the revolution to come. Few people at the time could have predicted that this quiet market town would soon become the center of a revolution. Everything began to change during the late 1600s and early 1700s with a new fabric imported from India. Cotton cloth was lighter than wool, easier to wash, and capable of holding bright dyes that wool could not match. Demand for cotton textiles began rising rapidly across Britain, but there was just one major problem. Britain could not grow cotton. The raw material had to be imported from overseas before it could be turned into cloth. This global trade network would soon pull Manchester into a system connected to events thousands of miles away. And as cotton began to replace wool as the most desirable fabric in Britain, the future of Manchester was about to change forever. Manchester slowly moved to the center of a global system known as the triangular trade. Raw cotton came from plantations in the American South and the Caribbean, worked by enslaved Africans forced into brutal labor. Those goods were traded for enslaved people, who were then transported across the Atlantic under horrific conditions. Afterward, the ships returned to Britain carrying cotton, and Manchester stood directly at the industrial end of that chain. Lancashire's damp climate turned out to be perfect for processing cotton fibers, which made the region especially suitable for textile production. At first, the work still happened in small homes and cottages. Spinners used simple spinning wheels to turn raw cotton into thread, while weavers operated hand looms to produce cloth. Merchants traveled between these homes collecting finished fabric and selling it in markets across Britain and overseas. For a time, this cottage industry system supported a growing textile trade. But the system soon faced a problem. Demand for cotton goods was rising faster than workers could produce them using traditional tools. Inventors began searching for ways to increase production. In 1764, James Hargreaves introduced the spinning jenny, a machine that allowed one worker to spin several threads at the same time. Only a few years later, in 1769, Richard Arkwright patented the water frame, which used water power to spin stronger threads at a much faster rate. Then, in 1779, Samuel Crompton combined ideas from both machines to create the spinning mule, which produced high-quality thread in large quantities. These inventions transformed textile production almost overnight. One person operating a machine could now do the work that had once required dozens of spinners. However, the new machines were large, complex, and expensive. They could no longer fit inside small cottages. They required powerful water wheels or steam engines to operate. They also required large buildings where many machines could run together under supervision. This was the beginning of the factory system. During the 1780s and 1790s, large cotton mills began appearing in Manchester and the surrounding towns. These mills were massive multi-story brick buildings filled with spinning machines and mechanical looms. Steam engines powered the equipment, allowing production to continue regardless of weather or river flow. Hundreds of workers were employed in a single building, performing repetitive tasks while the machines operated continuously. By the year 1800, Manchester was undergoing a dramatic transformation. What had once been a modest market town was becoming something entirely new, an industrial city. Cotton production expanded rapidly. More mills were constructed. Workers arrived in increasing numbers searching for employment. Smoke from steam engines filled the air as machines operated day and night. The pace of economic growth was extraordinary, and Manchester was quickly becoming the center of the world's cotton manufacturing industry. Yet the rise of this new industrial system brought serious consequences. The wealth generated by the mills was enormous, but it was not shared equally. Factory owners and merchants accumulated fortunes, while the workers who operated the machines often lived in difficult conditions. Families moved into crowded housing built quickly to accommodate the growing population. Streets became dense with new buildings, and sanitation systems struggled to keep up with the rapid expansion. Still, the opportunity for wages continued to draw people from rural areas into the city. For many families struggling in the countryside, even low-paid factory work offered a chance to survive. Manchester's population began growing at a speed few cities had ever experienced before. Manchester in the 19th century was the heart of industrial innovation, but its progress came with profound hardship. By 1801, what was once a quiet town became a global industrial center. But behind the tall brick mills, workers faced severe human costs. Families lived packed in tiny rooms with no clean water, and children worked long, dangerous hours in the factories. Known as Cottonopolis, Manchester's wealth was built on the labor of the poor and the enslaved. Both fueled a global industry. Yet, as the city grew, so did the workers' demand for a voice. Profits flowed to the owners, but the people had no representation. Frustration built as the city entered a new era of struggle. This was the dawn of a new social world. By 1819, tensions in industrial England reached a breaking point. On August 16th, a massive crowd gathered at St. Peter's Field in Manchester to demand parliamentary reform. Estimates suggest that between 60,000 and 80,000 people attended the peaceful meeting. Men, women, and children arrived dressed in their best clothes, many carrying banners calling for liberty and fair representation. Families even brought food baskets, treating the gathering as a hopeful public demonstration. Local authorities became alarmed at the size of the crowd, fearful that the meeting could turn into rebellion. Magistrates ordered the arrest of one of the speakers advocating reform. To carry out the arrest, they called in the local yeomanry, a volunteer cavalry force made up of part-time soldiers. Many of these riders were inexperienced, and some had reportedly been drinking before arriving. What followed quickly descended into chaos. The cavalry charged directly into the tightly packed crowd, swinging their sabers as they tried to reach the platform where the speakers stood. Panic spread as people attempted to escape. Many were knocked down or trampled while trying to flee. Soon, professional soldiers from the 15th Hussars were also sent in to control the situation. When the violence ended, 15 people had been killed and more than 600 were injured. The event became known as the Peterloo Massacre, a bitter reference to the recent Battle of Waterloo. Instead of a military victory, Peterloo represented the moment when the government used force against its own citizens, who were peacefully demanding political rights. Although the tragedy did not immediately bring reform, it left a lasting mark on the national consciousness. The memory of Peterloo strengthened the movement for democratic change, and Manchester's workers continued pressing for political representation. Only a decade later, however, the city would once again find itself at the center of world-changing events. This time, the transformation would come not through violence, but through a revolutionary new form of transportation that would redefine how people and goods moved across the industrial world. Just 11 years after the tragedy at St. Peter's Field, Manchester again became the center of a moment that would shape the future. But this time the event was not about political protest or violence. It was about technology and progress. On September 15, 1830, a large crowd gathered near Liverpool Road to witness something completely new. The world's first modern intercity passenger railway was about to open between Liverpool and Manchester. The railway represented a revolutionary idea. For centuries, people and goods had moved slowly by horse, wagon, or canal boats. A journey between Liverpool and Manchester could take most of a day. Now, engineer George Stephenson had developed a steam locomotive capable of pulling carriages at an unbelievable speed. His locomotive, known as the Rocket, would carry passengers at speeds reaching nearly 30 miles per hour. For people in the early 19th century, such speed felt almost unimaginable. The opening ceremony attracted politicians, investors, engineers, and curious spectators. Everyone wanted to witness the beginning of what many believed would be a new era of transportation. Unfortunately, the day also became associated with tragedy. During the celebrations, a member of Parliament stepped out of his carriage while the train was stopped along the tracks. Distracted while greeting other guests, he wandered onto the railway line. When the locomotive began moving again, it struck him. He later died from his injuries, becoming the first recorded railway passenger fatality in history. Despite the accident, the railway quickly proved its value. Within a few years, rail lines spread outward from Manchester in every direction. Raw cotton could now arrive from ports much faster than before, and finished textiles could be transported quickly to markets across Britain and beyond. The railway dramatically increased the efficiency of the industrial system that had already begun transforming the city. As the industrial economy expanded, public attention also began turning toward the moral questions surrounding the cotton trade. By the 1830s and 1840s, the anti-slavery movement in Britain was growing stronger. Many people had begun confronting the brutal reality that the cotton feeding Manchester's mills was largely grown by enslaved workers on American plantations. Britain had abolished the slave trade in 1807 and slavery within its own colonies in 1833. Yet the global cotton supply remained closely connected to slavery in the United States. Manchester found itself caught in a difficult position. The city's mills depended on a steady flow of cotton, and many mill owners preferred not to discuss where the raw material originated. Acknowledging the connection between their industry and slavery raised uncomfortable questions. Yet many ordinary workers in Manchester clearly recognized the relationship. They understood exploitation from their own experience of factory life. While their circumstances were not the same as slavery, they saw similarities in the economic systems that kept both groups struggling. In 1842, a young German man arrived in Manchester to work in his father's cotton business. His name was Friedrich Engels. He came from a wealthy background, but nothing had prepared him for the conditions he encountered in the industrial city. Engels spent months exploring the working-class neighborhoods of Manchester, observing the crowded housing and polluted streets. He carefully documented everything he saw: families living in damp basements and open sewers running through narrow alleys. Children suffered from disease caused by poor nutrition and unhealthy environments. Workers frequently coughed up blood after years of breathing cotton dust inside the factories. Engels described the long working hours, the constant noise of machines, and the harsh discipline that governed factory life. In 1845, he published a book titled The Condition of the Working Class in England. The work exposed the harsh realities of industrial capitalism to readers across Europe. It also brought Engels into close collaboration with another German thinker, Karl Marx. Together, they would later write the Communist Manifesto in 1848. A political document that analyzed the growing conflict between industrial workers and the wealthy owners. Meanwhile, Manchester grew rapidly, but the American Civil War would soon create a crisis for the city's vital cotton industry. In 1861, a Union Navy blockade stopped the flow of raw cotton. Mills closed, and the Lancashire cotton famine began, leaving hundreds of thousands unemployed. Confederate representatives offered a deal: support the South to regain cotton and jobs. This placed workers in a painful moral position. Supporting the Confederacy meant supporting slavery. Opposing it meant continued poverty for their own families. On New Year's Eve, 1862, thousands of workers met and made a remarkable choice. They declared support for the Union and the abolition of slavery. They wrote to President Lincoln, choosing the cause of freedom over their own economic relief, a legacy that Manchester honors to this day. Lincoln later responded with a letter expressing deep admiration for the decision made by Manchester's workers. He acknowledged the suffering they were experiencing and praised what he described as an extraordinary example of moral courage. Eventually, the war ended in 1865, slavery in the United States was abolished, and cotton production slowly resumed. The cotton famine came to an end, but the episode left a lasting mark on Manchester's identity. During the late 19th century, the city reached the height of its economic power. By the 1870s, Manchester had become one of the largest and wealthiest industrial cities in Europe. Some of the wealth generated by the cotton trade was invested in impressive public buildings. One of the most famous examples was the new town hall, completed in 1877. Designed in a dramatic Gothic revival style, the building symbolized the city's ambition and pride. Inside its great hall, murals illustrated Manchester's history from Roman times to the industrial age, presenting the city as a place shaped by centuries of progress and innovation. By the beginning of the 20th century, Manchester's population had grown to more than 500,000 people. Cotton production connected the city to markets around the world, and the influence of its industries was enormous. There was even a saying that captured this influence: what Manchester does today, the world does tomorrow. Yet the 20th century would bring enormous challenges. 2 world wars would reshape the city, village, industries would decline, and economic changes would force Manchester to reinvent itself once again. Mills gradually closed, warehouses emptied, and the city that had once led the Industrial Revolution struggled to adapt to a changing global economy. But Manchester proved remarkably resilient. Over time, the city transformed itself again. Former industrial warehouses were converted into apartments, offices, and creative spaces. Universities expanded and attracted students from around the world. New cultural movements emerged through music, sports, and media. Football clubs gained global followings, and artists continued to influence international culture. Today, Manchester stands as a modern city built on layers of history stretching back nearly 2,000 years. From a Roman fort beside 2 rivers, to a medieval market town, to the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, and finally to a vibrant modern metropolis, the city has continually reinvented itself. The buildings and industries may change with each generation, but the spirit of its people remains a constant thread. Resilient, innovative, and determined, connecting Manchester's past to its future.